All right, welcome back to the Dell FMC campus, live in Las Vegas, Adobe 2017, Adobe Max 2017. We've got some awesome classes happening, 30-minute sessions, free. Want everybody to come on in and take a seat in one of our precision workstations over here and get your hands on it. And without further ado, we want to introduce our master instructor, Mr. Maxim Jago. Take it away, Maxim.
Thank you very much, Paul. Hello, everybody. I'm very happy to be here on the Dell booth with FMC. We've got a slightly shorter session this time, so I'm going to give you my really compressed introduction to working with color correction in Adobe Premiere Pro. And if you've got these assets on your system already, what we're looking to do is open up, let me get this up on screen here. Here we go. In this Maxim Jago PPC Assets folder, you should see a project called Cheat at Color Correction. The clue is in the name. Now you can open this from inside of Premiere Pro by, if you're on the welcome screen there, you can just click on Open Project and then just browse to the desktop. You'll find that folder and you can open up Cheat at Color Correction. Now when you open this up, Premiere Pro is going to ask you to save another version because this is the next release of Premiere Pro installed on these machines. So it's going to update the project file. Just say yes, say OK, and you'll end up with an _1 version, and we'll all be on the same page. OK, so in this project, I've got a few sequences open already. How many of you know Premiere Pro basically already? If you know it a little bit, so you know how to open sequences? A little blank face? Nothing? OK. So, hello. So, in the project panel here, and let me just, interesting. Let me zoom in a little bit so you can see this more clearly. In the project panel here, let me minimize this. I've got a few sequences, and I think what I want to start out with is this CU Serious sequence. Just double click on that, and it'll open up in the timeline panel. This is yours truly, trying to look very serious for a film. And if you just scrub along the top of the timeline with this, you can see that there's not much going on in the shot. We've got a little bit of darkness on the left and right of my face, and there's some really nice strong lighting for this. But I want to make this even more dramatic. So what I'm going to do is switch up here at the top of the screen. We're going to go into the color workspace, just click on the word color. And just in case other people have been working with these machines and maybe they've moved things around a little bit, I'm going to click on the menu next to the word color, and I'm going to choose Reset to Saved Layout. And that's just going to put us back to the same starting point to work on this clip. It's also going to bring up the Luminary color panel over on the right side of the screen, which is what we're going to work with when we're changing the colors in this shot. The Luminary color panel has really good colorimetry. It's actually a lot of the technology taken from SpeedGrade that Adobe acquired and brought into the Creative Cloud applications. Now a lot of that technology is inside of Premiere Pro. But to see what's going on with this media, we need to use our scopes. So at the top left of the screen, I'm going to choose Luminary Scopes, and this is going to bring up a panel with a number of different options for vector scopes and waveforms. We don't have time today to go into all of these different displays, but there's one in particular I want us to choose, and we're going to work with that to find out what's going on with the luma levels in this shot. So I'm going to right click in the middle of this Luminary Scopes panel, and I'm going to make sure that you've got the waveform selected. It should be there already. And I'm going to go to waveform type, and I'm going to choose YC No Chroma. This just strips out the color information and just gives me the luma, so I can see what's going on in my picture. Now, if you don't know how a waveform works, it's actually fairly simple when someone explains it, so I'll just run over it very quickly. All the pixels in this image are being displayed in the waveform. And the horizontal position of these dots is the horizontal position in the picture. But the vertical position is now irrelevant. The vertical position now represents the amount of brightness, the amount of luminance for those pixels. And this makes a lot of sense. If I zoom out a little bit so you can see, on the left part of the image there's a lot of dark pixels, and so we've got these green dots near the bottom of the waveform. In the middle there are a lot more brighter pixels, you can see on my face there, so we've got a lot more lighter pixels indicated in the waveform, and then on the right it's a bit darker but not as dark as on the left. What's important about the waveform, and the thing that really opens up the technology if you're new to it, is if you look on the far left, we've got numbers that go from 0 to 100. We're in the US, we're working on the IRE scale, and on the IRE scale, it goes from 0 to 100. And you can treat that as a percentage. Our goal is for the dark parts of the picture to be near 0, the really dark, the black pixels in the image, and the really bright pixels to be right at the top, above 90, somewhere towards 100, the real highlight sections of the image. So what we want to do is use the controls in the Luminary color panel to adjust the image so that these dots line up where we want them. It's actually pretty straightforward. If we go over to the Luminary color panel, and you'll notice that the clip is selected, you want to make sure that clip is selected. Over on the right, I've got several sections: basic, creative, curves, color wheels, and so on. I'm going to use the curves, so just select that option. And the way the curves work is they allow you to make adjustments to the input level and the output level in a very natural way. The clue's in the name again, it's the curve. And this curve is another kind of graph. You imagine the bottom line of this graph is the input levels, and the vertical line on the right is the output levels. So if you imagine any pixel that's 50% bright comes up, hits the line, and comes out at 50%. That's with the default setting. If I pull this down, you can just click and drag to pull this down. Now, a pixel that's 50% bright will come out at 25%. You get the idea. But because it's a curve, because it's a line, it means that we get this very natural adjustment to all of the pixels in the image, not just the ones at the level that you adjusted. If you want to reset anything in this window, just double click it, it'll reset back to the default value. Okay, so if I make that kind of adjustment again, you can see what I'm adjusting now is the midtones of the image. And actually, the way our eyes work, we're much more sensitive to adjustments to midtones than anything else. Because of the mechanics of our human vision, we kind of expect not to be able to make things out too well in the very dark areas of what we see or the very bright areas. In particular, you'll notice that we don't expect to see any color in the dark areas of the image. And that's because the parts of your eye, the cones that see color, aren't very good in low light. That's why when you walk around at night, everything looks kind of black and white. It's literally that part of your eye is blind. You're just seeing with the rods. Anyway, I'm going to double click to remove this. And what I'm going to do is use these little control points at the end of the curve to adjust the bottom and the top of my waveform. I'm not even looking at the picture right now. So I'm going to click and I'm going to drag in so that I get these really clean, dark pixels. And then I'm going to click at the top and I'm going to drag left until those green dots are pushing out towards the highlights. Just make this a little bit stronger so you can see what I've done. If I go full screen here, is I've flattened out the pixels at the bottom. That gives me a really clean black level in my picture. And I've also got some pixels right at the top. You see that flat line there? That means I'm burning out some pixels as well. In terms of the accurate reproduction of reality, this is now worse quality than it was. But in terms of looking filmic, and looking sexy and cool, it's great. Because now I've got this much stronger, punchier, more three-dimensional image in the picture. All I did was make it more contrast, but instead of just cranking up the contrast, which has a fixed pivot point for the contrast, which is at 50%, instead I'm adjusting it based on the waveform. Just using the waveform to guide your decisions in this way will give you a dramatically improved result with your pictures. Okay, by the way, I'm pressing the grav key here. It's the top left key next to the number 1 to go full screen and back to regular size. But what if I want to go even further with this? Well, what I can do is drag this control point even further in. And I'm just setting this now so that you can see the glint in my eye. You've got just a little bit of the shadow releasing up there to see the other eye on my face. And now I'm pulling in and in and in these highlights. So now we're really crushing the highlights in the image. And again, if I go full screen, we've now got the beginnings of a really intense piece of media. It's the exact same shot. This is why grading artists say that the story is really told with the grade. It's told with the colors. So now, what if I want to put in a little bit of a color adjustment? Well, if you look at the curves control here, we've got red, green, and blue controls. And really, if you're familiar with a color wheel, in fact, we've got one at the bottom of the screen here. Let me zoom in so you can see it. The way the curve controls work is a little bit like a color wheel, in that when you increase the position of the line, so you lift it up, you get more of that color at that level. And if you decrease it, you get the secondary opposite color on the color wheel. So here, for example, if we look at the color wheel, where I've got blue, the opposite side of the color wheel is yellow. Yellow is the secondary color for blue. Same for red, I get cyan. For green, I get magenta. It's the same principle as using a color wheel, but we're doing it with curves to get this natural drop-off for the entire image. So here, I'm going to zoom out a bit, and I'm just going to turn up the blue a little. Just pull that across, so we're getting a little bit more of that interesting color. I'm going to go back to the overall composite luma and pull back the highlights a little bit. I'm going to go back to the blue. I'm going to pull in the shadows. And now we're getting this very interesting layered effect. Let's pull up the shadows a little more. Great. And now we've got a bit of a blue tint that just makes it look a bit colder. I'm getting a bit too much magenta there, so I'm going to increase the green. And this is very much a science and an art. This is the art part of this is the experimentation, is the exploration. So now let's look at another example. I'm going to open up this water surface shot. And this is a pretty plain looking piece of media. I just shot this, I've got a GH4, I shot this at 96 frames per second, it's 1080, Panasonic camera. I'm very happy with it, but if we look at the waveform, we can see there's very little contrast in this shot. Now everywhere I go, I find myself shooting just interesting textures to use as backdrops for media, and this is a perfect example. So back over at my curves, I'm going to go in, and I'm going to just drag in until the markings in the waveform are right at the 0 point. There we go. I'm not even looking at the picture. Now I'm going to take this high mark and I'm going to drag left, up and up and up until the highlights are touching the 100 mark. Now let's take a look at this media. That looks pretty interesting. That water that was looking kind of plain and uninteresting is now punchy and three-dimensional. It looks like metal. I've done nothing to it at all, but selectively increase the contrast using the waveform as my guide. Now that I'm here, I can do some other interesting stuff, like maybe I'll pick out a color range and I'll make an adjustment. In fact, while I'm here, why don't I make a secondary adjustment? I'm going to choose the HSL secondaries. I've got a number of eyedroppers here. I'm going to use this eyedropper to pick some of this sort of mid-range blue. I'm going to be pretty lazy about this. I've got these slider controls that allow me to specify the range that I'm going to make a color adjustment to. Now the names are abbreviated, which isn't very helpful when you're first learning, but it's hue, saturation, and luminance. And by picking out a particular pixel, and by the by, if you hold down the control or command key, you get a 5x5 pixel average instead of a single pixel. It's good for noisy footage. But over here I've got hue, saturation, and luminance, so I'm just going to expand the position of these triangles to pick a wider range of these pixels. So I'm making a color selection within the image. Now, the problem is I'm making this selection, but I don't know really what it's doing to my image. So to make it easier for me to identify the pixels I've selected, I'm going to go down to this correction color wheel, and I'm going to make a really dramatic change. What I usually do is I make it very, very magenta. It's rare for you to see magenta in images. As the grading artists say, if there's magenta in the picture, someone's going to die. It's a super unhealthy color. If any of your friends are magenta, take them to a doctor. So I'm going to drag this out. I'm holding the shift key to speed up the control. I'm dragging this right out to the edge in the magenta. And now I can see the pixels that I selected. So now I'm going to go in, I'm going to soften this. I'm going to stretch out the secondary triangle. I'm going to soften a lot to make sure that I've got very smooth edges in my selection. So the first triangle at the top is the hard stop for your selection range. The second triangle at the bottom is for smoothing the mask that you're creating. Okay, good. Now I've got a secondary. Let's make this a bit more natural looking. So I'm going to double click to reset the control, and I'm just going to start playing around. I'm using the shift key to speed this up. I'm holding down shift, and I'm just going to see if I can give this a bit more nuance. Maybe I'll pull this over towards the blue, maybe even the cyan or yellow. And this kind of works for me. I'm moving into the cyan, and that combined with the shadows, the pixels I did not select, I'm getting this really interesting metallic shot. And you can see right away, this is now much more interesting. This is half resolution, let me put it up to full. We've got this much more interesting backdrop to use for titles, graphics, or whatever it is that I'm going to use. Okay, now I think I've got, let me see what else I've got here. Here's another really perfect example. If I go to, this is the rooftop mid shot, and if we look at the Lumetri color panel under creative, we've got a number of film looks that I can apply. First of all, before I get to that, let me see if I can fix up this evening smile shot. Open up the evening smile sequence. You can see this has got a very strong color cast. But looking at the background, it seems to me that this area on the left is really supposed to be white, and it isn't. This was shot in sodium light, and I want to make it look more natural. Certainly this person in the dress in the background should be white. So I'm going to go to my basic correction controls, and I'm going to pick the eyedropper for white balance select. I'm going to select that, and I'm going to click on, I think, this building because it's closer to the subject. I'm just going to click on something that is not white but should be. And right away, Premiere Pro adjusts the colors to compensate, and now we're getting a much more natural looking color range. In fact, looking at it now, I can see this is a mixed lighting situation, and that's always going to be difficult. And we can help with that a little bit by using a mask. In fact, you know what? I think we've got time. We'll run over a couple of minutes. I can show you this. I'm going to go to my effect controls where this Lumetri color effect is, and you can see the Lumetri color effect's been applied. Just under that effect, we've got the option to mask the effect within a region. I'm going to be super lazy. I'm going to choose the 4-point polygon mask. I'm going to click that. And now I'm going to see if I can just resize this polygon so that it covers the action I want. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. There's a zoom control here. So I've got my controls, and I'm just resizing the mask so that my subject in my foreground, which has this tungsten light, is affected by my Lumetri color effect. I'm just going to resize this so it goes right outside of the picture. And then over in the mask settings, I'm going to massively feather this. So by feathering it in this way, I'm creating some smoothing. Let's make it even more between the foreground and the background where I've applied this effect. So I'm constraining the effect within the mask. Now if I click away to deselect the mask, still a little bit blunt. You can see the makings of the line, but we've now got that blue background is retained, and we've got the color compensation for the foreground to correct for that tungsten light. And I might want to go back in here. I'm going to select that mask, and maybe I'll just pull this back a little more. Maybe I'll feather it a little more. Maybe I'll even soften the impact of the effect. I'm going to reduce the opacity so that we get a more natural looking blending between the two. And now my foreground color and my background color is a much closer match. So that's applying an effect with automated white balance and constraining it within a mask. And the last thing I wanted to show you is if I go to this rooftop mid sequence, over in the Lumetri color panel under creative, in the creative section, I've got a number of film looks. You can just click on the thumbnail here, there's a browser to choose different looks. I think I kind of like the second one there. And if you like the appearance of it, just click once in the image and the look is applied to the clip. Now I'm a sucker for a 235 crop. And I know that it's a cheap, easy way of making things look more filmic, but basically everything I've delivered for years is 235 or 239 to 1. So over in the left of my screen here, I'm going to go to my effects panel. I'm going to search at the top of the effects panel. I'm just typing in the word crop. This is going to find the crop effect for me. I'm going to drag this onto the clip. And then up in the effect controls panel, I'm going to put in a 13% crop at the top and bottom. I'm just typing in 13. And now, let me zoom out. We've got this much more filmic looking shot. Set this to fit. And all I've actually done with this footage is throw on a pre-built Lumetri look. I have done nothing to adjust those settings, but of course I can. I've thrown on a crop, And the very next thing I can do is invoice my client. I think that looks beautiful. Now we've got some burning out on the skin, it's all good. I shot this on a rooftop in New York, and we're good to go. You can put that crop and the lumetri effect onto an adjustment layer if you like, very easily in Premiere Pro, and you can use combinations of adjustment layers to apply a look to a scene or to an individual clip. Okay, so I am out of time. Thank you so much for coming along. It just remains to say thank you again to Dell for hosting us and to FMC, and enjoy the rest of the show.